Y'all, I tried to make this a tight, quick recap, but there's just so much to talk about coming out of Watches and Wonders. You've likely already seen a lot of pure information about sizes, prices, accuracy, and all that. So today we're going to move beyond the numbers and get a little more opinionated and talk about the biggest winners and losers of Watches and Wonders 2025. I'll try to be reasonable as we move through each category today, including the biggest surprise, the single best and worst watch of the show, the biggest trend emerging, and the strongest and weakest brand overall. Now, there's no doubt you're gonna disagree with a healthy portion of this, but that's the fun part. So please drop a comment with your thoughts as we go. Be sure to hit that subscribe button for more debates and hot takes just like this. Our first category of the day is biggest surprise of the show. Every other category in this video is gonna be much more competitive, but the real winner here is without a doubt the Rolex Land-Dweller. Now, this is a watch that would have been an even bigger surprise if you hadn't blown it, Roger. It's the most talked about watch from the show, and this release goes against so much of what Rolex is known for. The rest of their releases follow the familiar pattern of making small tweaks on existing designs. Maybe we get a new dial color or a slightly better movement or a modified case if they're feeling adventurous. This is Rolex's first new sport model in over a decade since the Skydweller came out in 2012, and the watch takes ample inspiration from the 1970s watches like the Oyster Quartz and the Mechanical Reference 1530. It's only 9.8 millimeters thick, approximately 20% less than the Datejust, and features what the brand is calling a flat Jubilee integrated bracelet that comfortably hugs the wrist and looks more matte than you might expect. The watch also includes an entirely new patented escapement by Rolex. Taking over 10 years to create, the Dynapulse escapement is a direct impulse escapement with dual silicone wheels that greatly reduces the amount of friction within the mechanism and therefore increases the consistency of the watch's beating heart and decreases the need for professional servicing throughout the life of the watch. We'll leave it at that for now, but there are some great deep dive articles on this new movement if you're into the engineering side of watches. The last thing to discuss about the Land-Dweller is the most controversial part of the watch, and that's the dial. I simply do not know where the inspiration came from for this. It's got a honeycomb pattern, technically, but it's not like the honeycomb pattern we've seen on vintage Rolex watches. The 6 and 9 numerals remind you of the Explorer, but with only 2 numerals, they don't feel that grounded in place. It's like they're floating around, wondering where all their friends went. The wide dial has drawn a lot of comparisons, the Tissot PRX naturally, and the Isu Blue dial on the Platinum version is as love or hate it as it ever is. The good news is that this model isn't going away anytime soon, and Rolex will no doubt continue to make new, different dials for this watch in the coming years. At least we hope. Now, there were a handful of trends we saw this year. Stone dials are continuing to be a big thing with brands like Piaget and Rolex outfitting more of their watches with natural materials. Piaget is a leader in this category, and their watches lend themselves well to this style because they let the stone breathe and be the center of attention without too many elements thrown on top. The Root Beer GMT with the Tiger Iron, yes, Tiger Iron dial, it's full of life, full of variety, and suits this watch so well. Also, there's a special lapis dial Zenith that was a bright spot in a dark year for Zenith. We'll talk more about that later. We also saw a bigger focus on bracelets this year. You, of course, have the Land-Dweller with the flat Jubilee integrated bracelet that we discussed earlier, and you have the 1908 with a new matching gold bracelet. Pro tip, all the press photos show this watch with a white dial, but I have a feeling that the black dial option will look even better. I think we'll also be seeing this bracelet in other precious metals like white gold or platinum before long. The new pink gold reverso bracelet really ties the watch together and makes it feel like a complete sculpture. You've always been able to add a third-party steel Milanese bracelet to your reverso, and it's cool to see the brand officially making their own version of this combo. Perpetual calendars were another big theme this year. We, of course, saw them from the usual suspects like Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, and Alain Gonzone. But we also got a delightfully minimalist QP from Parmigiani Fleurier, an Ingenieur Perpetual that's cool but maybe a touch too bulky. Panerai did a GMT Perpetual calendar that at 44 millimeters in platinum is definitely too bulky. And Frédéric Constant made a relatively affordable in-house Perpetual calendar for under $10,000. That's $9,995 to be exact. Jumping hour watches, oddly enough, were also a bit of a theme this year. JLC added one to the Reverso. Bremont made a couple surprisingly, although they put one on the left side of the dial that'll be covered up by your sleeve half the time. And one of the most talked about watches from the show is the revived Tank à Guichet. This watch has been in and out of Cartier's catalog since the 1920s, and it hits that combination of quirky and prestigious in a way that only Cartier really can. It took a while for my eyes to adjust to it, but I am into the winking version as well. However, when we zoom out, perhaps the biggest trend of 2025 was that brands played it a bit safer than they did in 2024. You may remember the nearly 18mm thick solid gold Rolex Deep Sea, or the Cartier Santos Dumont Rewind that tells time in reverse. Outside of the Land-Dweller, we didn't see too many true surprises coming from the show. Maybe that's an economic reaction. Maybe that's a natural ebb and flow of design. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Who knows? What is noticeable is that the brands, by and large, seem to be drilling down on what's already working for them. Normally, I'm cynical about this sort of thing, but I think they found ways to reinvent and recontextualize the Tank, the Reverso, the Ingenieur, or the Grand Complication in a way that feels like a fresh evolution. That's kind of a contradictory term, but there seems to be a lot of future classics coming out of Watches and Wonders. However, if they lean on these tentpoles too much, too often, then it becomes stale. Just ask Audemars Piguet. All right, enough of the positivity. Let's talk about the single biggest miss of the show. Just to say it again, there were not as many big misses as 2024. I mean, last year, the clear winner or the clear loser was that solid gold Deep Sea, a watch that does not need to exist. Now, we did see a Tudor Pelagos Ultra that's water resistant to 1,000 meters. It's nowhere near as loud as the gold Deep Sea, so it gets a pass, even though 1,000 meters is about 3 times deeper than the world record. My point is that regardless of what they look like, there's no need to make watches that go deeper than the human body can withstand. The gods laugh at mankind's hubris. Next, the Patek Philippe Hubris is better at 40 than it is at 45 millimeters, but it's still not a design I can get behind. Bulgari is acting like a broken record by breaking their own records. Their big release, the new 1.85 millimeter thick Alto Finissimo Tourbillon, feels like a watch that already existed because it's basically the same as their previous world record holder, but just a tiny, tiny bit thinner. And it's priced at $678,000. They would make a lot more money as a company if they simply made the Alto Finissimo in a wearable size. In a comment to Mike Naveau, he said that watch, that mid-size Alto, is currently in the works. I just hope they release it sooner than later because my patience is wearing thin enough to win its own world record. This all brings us to the biggest miss of the show, and that's the Tag Heuer Formula One. To be fair, these watches are well-timed, well-executed, and they're a great nostalgia move for the company right as their F1 sponsorship kicks in a high gear. The issue is that they've taken a fun watch and sucked all the fun out of it by pricing it at roughly $2,000 a piece. These are battery-operated watches made of steel and plastic that should be competitively priced with the Moon Swatch. You just know there's a lot of markup factored in between the production cost and the retail price. And all that does is make the vintage versions much more tempting as a consumer. And that unrealistic price tag is the reason why this Tag Heuer Formula One is the biggest miss of the show. Also, did you see this Patek Philippe? Ew. Now let's talk about a big prize, the best watch of the show. There were quite a few record breakers beyond that Alto Finissimo to discuss, and a few hits that people had strong emotional reactions to. First, we have to get up to Grand Seiko for their UFA, or Ultra Fine Accuracy movement. It's accurate to plus or minus 20 seconds per year. Not per day, not per month, per year. This is incredible and a big improvement given that their previous benchmark was plus or minus 15 seconds per month with the caliber 9R96. It's pushing their spring drive innovation to the edge, and combined with that richly textured dial, it's perhaps the most Grand Seiko watch the Grand Seiko has ever made. But perhaps the biggest improvement for your day-to-day experience with the watch is that the bracelet finally has a micro adjustment feature. Based on the conversation around this piece, it's funny to see how the immense technical achievement in movement technology is now basically overshadowed by what is essentially a small piece of metal that slides in and out of the bracelet. Next, we gotta talk about Vacheron because they created the most complicated wristwatch in the world with 41 in total, including 14 astronomical complications, 5 chiming complications, 4 chronograph complications, as well as a world timer and a GMT. I mean, can you imagine the service cost for something like this? It's 45 millimeters by 15 millimeters, which is more manageable in size than you might expect. Of course, this is not a consumer-focused piece as the brand only made one, and to my knowledge, hasn't publicly released any pricing info. It reportedly took 8 years of work to create, so maybe they'll break even on it if they sell it at all versus put it in a museum. Regardless, you have to admire that Vacheron is doing this for pure love of the game. Lange killed it as usual, not only with the new Odysseus in honey gold, but with an enamel dial perpetual calendar minute repeater in platinum. I have no notes here. Just across the street in Glashütte, Nomos was working on a delightful series of world timers. I believe these might be some of the thinnest of their kind at just 9.9 millimeters, and the colors are seriously fun to use an oxymoron. It's functional, it's comfortable, and it's pretty affordable, and the limited edition should sell out quickly. Now on to the more emotional reactions. People were really taken away by the reverso on a matching Milanese bracelet. It's a relatively small change that changes the whole feel of the watch, and it's something they should definitely do more in the future. GLC had a super strong year, and we'll talk more about that later when we discuss which brand did the best overall. That Iron Tiger Root Beer GMT is another small change that makes sense and makes a big difference. This is a watch that deserves to be seen in person, although we all know how hard that will be. The Tank à Guichet is one of the coolest, quirkiest, most talked about watches coming out of the show, although it's not our winner for today since it's really just a repeat of a previous hit. So who's the real winner here? To be completely biased, it's a watch that really didn't do it for me until this year, until this Watches and Wonders. I was a proud hater, or at least a proud cynic, of the IWC Ingenieur. It was a watch that, to me, felt too late to the party for integrated bracelet sport watches, with a design that felt a bit too neutral and a price that felt a bit too high. But after seeing the new size in 35 millimeters, the new unapologetic rose gold version, and my absolute favorite in the blacked out ceramic, I'm really coming around on this watch. It's still not cheap per se, but everything else is getting more expensive, and the integrated bracelet format is the perfect canvas for the full ceramic treatment. This is a watch that feels like a unit, a watch that feels like an attack dog. I mean, this thing could tackle you to the ground as soon as you turn your head. It's priced at $20K, which is a lot, but not insane. And IWC tends to sell for a bit less on the secondary market anyway. I also wouldn't be surprised if IWC did more ceramic or ceratanium ingenieurs in the future. And that's something to look forward to. There will be many of you who disagree with this pick, and I genuinely look forward to your comments here. At the end of the day, it's all about emotion, and this black ceramic ingenieur, for reasons I can't really put into words, is the watch that grabbed me and hasn't let go. This category is going to sting a bit because we're talking about the weakest brand showing at Watches and Wonders. Overall, it was a strong year for the industry in terms of new releases. I'll say that again and again. But there's one brand that feels like it has lost the plot and is leaving a lot of potential success on the table, and that's, unfortunately, Zenith. There's a lot to like about the brand as a whole, so consider this a bit of tough love. They leaned hard into blue ceramic this year, but it just so happens to be a nearly identical blue ceramic that AP has used before. This isn't huge by itself, but it's also worth noting that their Defy skyline seems to take quite a bit of inspiration from the Royal Oak, and their Chronomaster Sport sure does look and feel like a Daytona. They have plenty of history and plenty of great watches in their archives that they don't need to swim in someone else's lane. And that's the frustrating part. What could be a better idea, not that they asked, would be to take the steel El Primeros that they're known for and get playful with the colorful subdials. It worked well for past El Primeros like the Salmon Dial Hodinkee edition, and those tri-color subdials provide a perfect canvas for experimentation. So if you're going to steal from anyone, steal from Nomos and go crazy with the colors for a year and see how it goes. It's cheap and doable from a manufacturing standpoint, and it feels more connected to the roots of the brand instead of trying to ride on someone else's success. To make a counter argument, their new high-end dress watch, the GFJ, was quite well received. It uses the historic caliber 135 movement and is beautifully finished and accurate to plus or minus 2 seconds per day. The watch is crafted in platinum with great details on the case and dial, and it's limited to 160 pieces. That's all well and good, but buyers have to love the brand enough to spend $50,000 on a Zenith instead of using that same money to buy a Patek Calatrava and a Longo 1. And that part feels like a challenge. This is not a brand I love to hate or hate at all. And most importantly, I think Zenith does have what they need right at their fingertips to change course and create the kind of watches that get people really excited and want to spend their money on. Our last category is the strongest brand showing at Watches and Wonders, and it's a competitive one. I want to start with a brand that rarely gets discussed, not because the watches aren't amazing, but because the brand is a bit niche, and that's Parmigiani Fleurier. They had a super strong year with new additions to their Tonda line, which is an absolute sleeper hit, and their Toric perpetual calendar shows how beautifully minimal this complication can be. Tudor had a great year by taking Rolex's strategy of slow and steady improvements. Also, their larger case sizes are sure to find customers in the tool watch crowd. Similarly, Grand Seiko found what they had excelled at and doubled down through more accurate spring drive movements and consistently beautiful textured dials. Cartier brought banger after banger out with their Tank lineup. The Aguichets are some of the best watches of the show, and they deserve the attention they're getting. The larger automatic Tank Louis fills a gap in the market and will surely find fans as well. The only thing that upsets me about Cartier this year is that their best watch, the Aventurine dial Santos Dumont, is limited to the French market. Really? Just France? IWC leaned on the Ingenieur in a way that worked. I wasn't sold on the initial releases of this watch, but it goes to show that if you keep iterating on something, you will find what works. And now I'm optimistic on the future of this watch and IWC as a whole. Patek had a strong year all around. The Cubitus is still an uninspired and unrefined design, but it's better in 40 versus 45. The Sitzi 159G perpetual calendar with the smoked sapphire dial and retrograde date is beautiful. It's classy and sexy at the same time, which is not easy to do. It's visually dense, but also easy to read at a glance. Maybe I'm wrong, but the smoked sapphire dial feels like a play to win back some customers who may have drifted out of Lange in recent years. They also added a 5308G, which features a split-second chronograph, minute repeater, and an instantaneous perpetual calendar. Those are the top three big boy complications, and the watch itself is a big boy at 42 millimeters wide by 16 millimeters thick. The bright blue dial color choice also makes the watch feel a bit more hype, or at least more noticeable than other complicated Pateks, if that's your thing. I never liked the Calatrava Pilot Time, but I do like the new color scheme they chose. And while I'm sad to see the 5370P get discontinued, I do like the warmth of the new 5370R. Vacheron had a pretty strong year. They, of course, made the most complicated wristwatch in the world. I think the new Patrimony watches are strong, and I do like the Maltese cross motif on the dial. Now, my eyes are still adjusting to the new open face watches that they came out with. It feels a bit much to have the Maltese cross on these so close to either the Maltese cross logo or the Maltese cross tourbillon. I also feel like this collection would have been stronger if it featured more moving parts. And by that I mean the two without tourbillons don't have running seconds, so you're looking at a lot of stationary parts for the calendar that move once a day at most. So Vacheron is decent, but not the winner. Rolex, a brand people love and love to hate, had a solid year. They're by far the biggest player in the market, and these new watches are guaranteed to sell well. Obviously, not everything is great. The Land-Dweller dial is a swing and a miss, at least to me. The Hulkified Sprite could be too much green for some people, and the teal and gold in Daytona don't seem to work well side by side. But the colorful Oyster Perpetuals are what they should be doing. The Stone Dial GMT is what they should be doing. The revived green and gold Daytona is what they should be doing. In a big way, this prize is Rolex's to lose. And there's a strong argument to be made that because they didn't screw it up and generally made some great watches, that they are the strongest brand of the year. But really, my heart tells me that this prize belongs to JLC. We quite recently made a whole video where I said I proclaimed that JLC is the most underrated brand in watches. And maybe that argument is null and void now that they've had such a consistently good showing at Watches and Wonders, with one banger after the next. On the more affordable end are the new duo face models in blue and black. Okay, they're really not that affordable, but you do get two watches for the price of one, and they'd be perfect travel companions with the time zone on each side. These would also be killer daily drivers on steel mesh bracelets if you're listening JLC. On the higher end, there's a minute repeater reverso and a gyro tourbillon reverso. These are undeniable flexes from a horological standpoint, especially given the relatively small real estate to play with. I also like the range that JLC is able to cover with just the reverso. It's far from their only watch, but it's easily their most versatile watch. Finally, the Reverso Tribute chronograph is a bit long at 49.4 millimeters lead to lead. A Submariner is 48 by comparison, but even though I couldn't pull it off, I'm really glad it exists. The globe on the back is laser engraved and then hand and filled with lacquer, and it's this wonderful smoothie of artistry, functionality, tradition, everything really. And that's not even mentioning their other enamel pieces, which are works of art in the truest sense. So again, this prize should probably go to Rolex, but my heart says that the strongest brand showing overall goes to JLC. This is the part where you come in. I'd love it if you agreed with me, but it's more fun when you don't. So make your case in the comment below about the best, the worst, and the watches you might actually be tempted to buy coming out of Watches and Wonders 2025. I'm Thomas Hendricks of Chrono 24. I'll see you next time.